Well, good morning. We are really glad that you guys are here. This is our last week in this series, Is God a Moral Monster? And Seth and John Stockstill have done a phenomenal job. And if you like what happens today and you missed any of the series, please check it out on our website. Lance is out of town, so I've been having to do a lot more stuff with technology. And I realized not only do we have the videos up there, but we have the daily devotionals that go with each of them. We have the notes that go in your bulletin. And then we also have the slides. So you could go memorize the video and go teach it somewhere and have that for yourselves. But do check it out. I did a wedding recently. Well, it was a couple years ago now, I guess. But here in Irvine. And they did the most phenomenal thing I've ever seen at a wedding. They had a taco cart. And I was thrilled, obviously. The only downside is there was this huge line, obviously. So I was waiting in line, as you do for tacos, and I was thinking about the fact that when I'm at a wedding, and Seth, you might be able to back this up, there tends to be three types of people that you run into at the wedding as a pastor. And number one is a person that just ignores you completely because nobody wants to party with the pastor. Right? So you got that one. The next one, you have the person that comes and thanks you and says what a good job you did on the sermon and talks about where they are spiritually, and they kind of lay out this confession, and it's nice, but it's sometimes it's a lot and not what you're expecting. And then third, there's this rare breed of person that comes up to you and thinks that this is the right time to figure out how you could possibly believe that God's real in this day and age. And so here I am waiting in line, excited for tacos, and I'm physically bumped into by the third type of person. And this person had their share and a couple other people's shares of liquid courage, but came up to me and said, how can you believe in God with so much evidence against that fact? Now, a story within a story here, a storeception, that's actually how I came to adopt my faith for the first time at 18 years old. See, I grew up in the church, and my mom and my grandmother were these wonderful spiritual leaders, and I had an amazing, deep-diving youth pastor, but I'd never actually been challenged in my beliefs before until my freshman year of college. In fact, my first semester, my first class was this philosophy class. And my professor decided to take that entire first period, that first lesson, to talk about how dumb Christianity was. In fact, the word he used was nonsensical, that it made no sense whatsoever. Now, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I knew not to argue with him in class, that wouldn't go well. But I did sign up for his very first study hours that he had in his office. And so I walked into the office a little bit terrified to confront him. I offered him my profusely sweating hand and shook it, and I squeaked out that I was a Christian, and I did not appreciate the way he was talking about Christianity. Now, to my great surprise, he actually reached under his shelf and pulled out a very well-worn Bible and a very highly highlighted Bible. Seth would be proud. But for the next hour, he took me through the Bible and he pointed to a bunch of verses in the Bible that seemed to contradict each other. And he showed me this and he said, how can you possibly believe this to be true when it's so obviously false within its own words? And I left that office, that hour, absolutely and utterly defeated. And I 100% can see why we have such a low success rate for students leaving college with their faith intact. But God intervened for me that day. There was some traffic on my normal route home, and so I went on a side street. And on the way home, I ran across the Sunshine Bookstore, the Christian bookstore. So I pulled in, not knowing whether this type of book actually existed, but I asked if they had anything that talked about these contradictions that show up in the Bible. And so they brought me to this section. I learned a new word that day, apologetics, defending the faith, which is pretty cool. But he gave me 7 or 8 books in a range of different topics. Where does morality come from? Is there evidence for the resurrection? What do you do with the problem of evil? How about perceived contradictions in the Bible? Exactly what I was looking for. So I walked up to the counter with my books, and the guy that had been helping me followed me up, and he pulled out his own wallet. And he said, Mark, I'm going to buy those books for you under one condition. I said, yeah, anything. You read all of them. I think it took me about 3 days to get through each and every one of those books. So back to the wedding, I told this guy that I believed that we actually had plenty of evidence for the existence of God. And after being prompted by him for a second, I laid a very quick case for the existence of God. But not just God, but the God of the Bible, the Christian God. I started with the idea that we exist at all, meaning that the Big Bang required a big banger, right? Somebody had to start this whole thing off. The fact that we have morality and objective moral truth, that there's a higher standard that we've been called to. And that the eyewitness accounts as recorded in the Bible point to the fact that Jesus is who he says he is. It's the most logical explanation for the events that take place in the Bible record. So now my goal, of course, is not to convince him of the reality of Christianity, merely to point to the fact that we have really good evidence in God that he exists. So when I finish up, he says to me, yeah, but how can you believe in God? Right, he missed the whole thing. So I gave him my number, and I said, I'd love to grab a coffee sometime, and I haven't heard back yet, but I am waiting for that phone call. But today I want to go in a little more detail about one of those pieces of evidence, one of the things that I really think points very strongly to the necessity for God. And that's the idea of morality and where morality comes from. Charlotte and Luke, my kids, they're in this area in life where they are getting to the point where their worlds are starting to collide. And there's no greater cause of strife in my home than over the remote control, right? Charlotte is a master of the remote, right? And every morning she's allowed to watch a show or two, depending on how good she was the day before. But she's so good at flipping through that, and she takes about 10 minutes to really find just the right show to spend her time on. And if she sets that thing down, Luke is going to come and snatch it up very quickly. Now, Luke doesn't really care for television very much. He does like Daniel Tiger, but he likes the reaction that happens when he pushes the buttons on the remote. And so he grabs the remote and he pushes it, and a plethora of things will happen. But typically, subtitles will get put on there, and I have to figure out how to turn those off. Or he'll mute it, which is always a big deal, or he'll pause it. Or the other day, he literally ordered the movie It, which we chose not to watch it. I just think he saw a clown and thought that looked nice. But no matter what he does, it leads to Charlotte snatching the remote back from his hand, which inevitably leads to Luke trying to then bite Charlotte, which leads to Jessica or I trying to explain right and wrong to our 1-year-old and our 3-year-old. But that does start with a bit of a presupposition, right? That stealing a remote from a 1-year-old is wrong, and biting a 4-year-old is also wrong. We know these things are true, though. We know there is right and wrong. We know that there's truth in this world that we can lean on. And it seems that the truth is real. But today's culture has somewhat sidestepped that idea. It seems that truth has been couched in the idea of what's true for you is true for you, but what's true for me is true for me. The idea of, hey man, you do you and I'll do me. Truth for me is my own. But if that's the case, everything is up for grabs. Frank Beckwith, a professor at UNLV, he had a class on ethics, and one of his students was kind of this relativist, this class relativist, who kind of bugged him each period, that would kind of get on him with the ethics he's trying to teach. And finally, at the end of class, she stands up and says, Dr. Beckwith, all semester you've been talking about why truth is so important, but why does it even matter? Which he replied to her, well, would you like the true answer or the false answer? That's a brilliant response, right? Because her very question assumes that there is such a thing as truth and that we can know it. I hear a lot of people as a youth pastor talking about this next generation and how they don't actually care about what's true anymore, that they don't believe in moral absolutes, which of course is not actually true, right? If you told your teenager this summer we're going to go on a week-long trip to Cancun, and that day came and they're packed and ready to go, and you said, never mind, actually, we're going to stay home and clean the house for a week instead, they're going to give you reasons that are going to appeal to truth and an objective moral standard that they think you broke, right? That's not fair. Just look at where we're at in culture today. Tell me truth is not important. With the FBI investigations, with the fake news, people are so sick and tired of half-truths, lies, and deception. We don't actually believe the idea that we can't have separate truths between us, because all that really means is somebody is being deceived. It's something Apostle Paul talked about 2,000 years ago. 2 Thessalonians 2:10, he said, with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish because they did not receive the love of truth so as to be saved. We should love truth. We should be heartbroken for this generation that's buying into lies. But before we can talk about how we know there's truth, we need to take a minute to define it, right? We need to be on the same page that we know what the truth of truth, right? Philosophers use something called the correspondence theory of truth. Now, it sounds fancy, but it's actually pretty common sense. It says a statement is true if it matches up with reality. So truth is when you describe the world as it actually is. I live in West Park. Now, what if I told you I rode my bike here this morning in 2 minutes flat? And I told you the reason I did this is because I rode my new red rocket bike. So after service, you walk outside and you see this sitting outside. Would my statement be true or false? You have to turn it on. My statement would be false because that's an orange rocket bike I have a picture of, right? Now, let's say you actually walk outside and you see this sitting in the parking lot, which is actually my vehicle. You would know I had made the whole rocket story up, right? It is a dream of mine, and one day I hope to have a lightsaber and a rocket bike, but we'll get there. Truth is simply if what we believe matches up with the world. That's what something means to be true. Charlotte and I have been learning about superheroes, and she's been learning their secret identities. So we'll match up superheroes and their secret identities, and she knows the true identity of most of the superheroes. Right? Children understand how truth works. Can you read all that? But we make a statement, and we see if it matches up to reality, which is the same way science works, right? We make a hypothesis. We make a claim about truth, and we test it to see if it matches up with the way the world works or not. So whether you knew the term correspondence theory of truth or not, so far it's a pretty common sense way of using it, right? This truth is how everybody operates in this world. And most people would not disagree with this discussion that we're having. Here's the thing, though. As the topic shifts to morality, or if we start to change it to religion, people will change what's meant by truth. Everybody uses the correspondence theory of truth. You can't not use the correspondence theory of truth. But for moral values and ethics, or the topic shifts to religion, without even realizing it in the minds of many people, will change what is meant by truth. If you don't mind, I'd like to think about ice cream for a minute. I do a majority of the grocery shopping in our house. And one of the benefits of doing the shopping is I get to pick the ice cream. And so I'll spend between 3 and 10 hours just checking all the ice creams to make sure that I got just the right one. But I always tend to pick the same ice cream. I always end up buying the same one, chocolate chip. Right? Because chocolate chip ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. Now, I believe that 100% with every fiber of my being. Does that actually mean that chocolate chip ice cream is the best ice cream in the world, period? No, of course not. Because some of you are rebellious sinners and you like cookies and cream or peanut butter cup or something like that. And we need to pray that you'll repent. No, of course not, right? Because ice cream is what we call a subjective truth. Right? Chocolate chip may be my favorite. In fact, it may be lots of people's favorite ice cream. We just can't be friends. Because when I say chocolate chip ice cream is my favorite ice cream, is the best ice cream, I'm making a statement about myself, my preferences, not the ice cream itself. Now, what if I told you the other reason I like chocolate chip is because it has medicinal properties, right? I like it because it has the ability to control diabetes. Now, is that something that could be true for me and not true for you? No, because medicine is not subjective, right? Diabetes requires insulin to regulate it. This is an objective truth, right? We're not talking about a personal preference. It's a claim about how the world actually operates. So subjective truth refers to the subject. Objective truth refers to the object. It's a fact about the world that we discover, and we can't change it because of our personal preferences. So let's try this out for a second. A little more audience participation. I'm going to put a few statements on the screen. And they're either going to be objective statements or subjective statements, okay? You're going to have a little time to think about this first one. It's a subjective statement. I want you to shout out ice cream, okay? If it's an objective statement, I like you to shout out insulin, okay? Because insulin controls diabetes, right? And remember, I'm not asking whether these are true or false. I'm just asking what kind of statement they are. So if it's subjective, shout out ice cream. If it's objective, shout out insulin. All right, here we go. Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Ice cream, that's right, because it's a preference. Even if you don't like Coke, you know that's a preference claim. Or how about this next one? Diet Coke has fewer calories than regular Coke. That's right, because it's a claim about the world itself. All right, next one. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Good. Now here's a historical claim. So a claim of history deals with objective truth, right? There's not a preference claim. It's a truth about history, all right? How about this one? Hawaii is the most beautiful vacation spot on earth. Ice cream, right? Because we all know it's Bora Bora. All right. All right, the next one. Action movies are better than romantic comedies. Ice cream. Some of you guys are having to keep your mouth shut a little bit, but yes, it is an ice cream claim. It's your preference in movies. All right, how about this one? Seth Gatchell can bench press 250. Now, Seth, do you know for sure if you can bench press 250? Have you actually ever tried? Yes, I've tried. In order to answer this question, though, whether it's ice cream or insulin, do we actually need that information? No, we don't. Because remember, all I'm asking you is what kind of claim this is. Is this a claim in there which there's an objective truth in the world, or is this a claim that's purely dependent on my subjective internal preferences? Right? I mean, we could grab a bench and some weights and let Seth Hulk out up here and see what happens. But either way, there's an objective truth about whether he can do it or not, which means we can have objective claims which we don't actually know the answers for, right? So if I said there's 500 quadrillion atoms in the universe, I don't think we could ever know that, but it's still a claim about objective reality, right? So how about this one? Earth is the center of the solar system. Insulin. It's a false statement, but it's a false insulin claim, right? So that means that we can have claims about reality and have the wrong answer about them, right? So we have historical claims and we have scientific claims, whether true or false, they're objective or insulin claims. All right, last one. Abortion is wrong. Insulin, ice cream, we heard a little bit of both. A lot of quiet on this one. This is not a scientific claim, nor is it a historical claim, right? Nor is it a silly claim. It's a moral, ethical claim. Are moral, ethical claims dealing with objective reality that exists in the world outside of our thinking? Or are moral claims internal preference claims about what we like or don't like? A few years ago, a young friend of mine got pregnant, and she was planning on having an abortion. And so I asked her to hang out with me and talk about it. And during the conversation, She said something like this. She said, look, this is my decision. I'm not asking you to do this. It's up to me what I want to do. And I asked her a question, a follow-up question. I said, well, are you against slavery? She said, well, of course I am. I said, well, if I'm not asking you to own a slave, and I'm saying it's other people's decisions and it's up to them what they want to do, then who are you to say? Now, why is she against slavery? Because she just doesn't like it? No, it's because she thinks it's actually wrong. What she's saying about abortion is, hey, if you don't like it, don't have one, right? If you don't like the chicken, get the fish. If you don't like vanilla, get chocolate. As if the question of morality of abortion is purely a subjective claim. So I challenged her on it, and she got confused. Because why are we against slavery? Because we think it's wrong to enslave a human being based on their skin color. That's objectively wrong. Right, back in January, we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr., not because we don't like slavery, hey, I just don't like it, but because we actually think it's objectively wrong, and racism is actually wrong. Right? In fact, as they pointed out in the video, if there is no objective standard for morality, then we can't judge anybody for doing anything morally wrong. If morality is like ice cream, we have no more right to make moral judgment calls on somebody than we have to make a judgment about their ice cream preferences. Who are you to judge a guy cheating on his wife or somebody robbing your home if morality is like ice cream? How can we make a judgment about what's going on in the Middle East or oppression or rape or even the Holocaust if morality is just ice cream? If we think morality is just like ice cream, we have no right to judge. Because the mood of our culture is that right and wrong are internal. It's subjective. You can have your truth and I can have mine. But you know what? When somebody tells me that that's true, I don't actually believe them. I don't believe our culture is really morally relativistic. I think they just select which morals they think are important and which they think aren't. See, we're up in arms about these children being taken from their parents at the border, which is awful. Yet, over 3,000 babies are murdered in the womb every day in the U.S. alone. Right? We all understand morality. We just pick and choose what we believe is actually moral or not. It says in Romans chapter 2, 14 and 15, for when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law, are a law unto themselves, in that they show the work of the law written where? In their hearts. See, part of being made in the image of God, of being a human being in general, is that we know there's such a thing as right, and we know there's such a thing as wrong. Look, if you climbed up onto this roof and you thought you could fly and you jumped off, an objective thing called gravity would have something else to say about that. Just as those laws of gravity exist in the objective world outside of us, there are laws of morality that exist objectively as a transcendent standard beyond all of us. In fact, this is what our Declaration of Independence says, doesn't it? Our founding document says this. Listen carefully. We hold these truths to be what? Right, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In other words, if people ask, how do we know that certain things are right or wrong? The answer is, it's obvious. It's self-evident. In the video, they said, torturing babies for fun is universally wrong. Now, if you understand the nature of babies, and you understand the nature of torture, and you understand the nature of fun, and you put those things together, it's self-evident that that's wrong. Remember Philosophy 101. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. It's obvious that Socrates is a mortal, right? It's self-evident that Socrates is mortal. It's obvious once you reflect upon the issue. Which is why when philosopher William Lane Craig says, if you don't believe rape is evil, you don't need a good argument, you need therapy, right? If you want to know what somebody really believes about morality, it's not what they say. In fact, it's not even what they do. If you really want to know what they feel about morality in their heart, it's about how they want to be treated. Right? Everybody wants to be treated as if morality is an objective feature of the universe, that it's inescapable. Right? Try sitting in the Bartlett seat some Sunday and see what happens to you. Or cut somebody off on the freeway and see how that goes for you. Or as C.S. Lewis would say, if somebody says there's no such thing as objective morality, cut in front of them in line. Right? What's the response going to be? Hey, I got here first. As if there's some transcendent moral standard that you and I are both obligated to, that the first person who's there has a moral right to go first. Or it's Dave's seat. Right? It's written on our hearts. In fact, Frank Turek would say, we know people's beliefs about morality not by their actions, but by their reactions. Right? We know people's beliefs because not by their actions, but by their reactions. That's why when somebody tells me that they're relativist, I just don't believe them. I read a book a while ago called Ethics by Sean McDowell. And it's a story about a professor, a friend of his named J.P. Moreland. He's a Biola professor. But at the time the story happened, he was a student at the University of Vermont. And he would go into college dorms and he would try to share the gospel by using the 4 spiritual laws, right? The idea that God has a wonderful plan for your life, that we've sinned and been separated from God, but because of Jesus, we can go back into a loving relationship with him. And if we ask, then Jesus will come inside, right? So J.P. Moreland walks into this freshman dorm and asks if he can share the 4 spiritual laws. And this freshman student says, sure, I'm willing to listen. So J.P. Moreland starts, with the 4 spiritual laws, which assume that there's an objective moral standard, right? That we've sinned and we've fallen short. And the student at the end goes, well, that's wonderful for you. See, I have a different moral truth. I don't think there's objective moral norms that apply to everybody. So you have your subjective moral truth and live accordingly. And I have my subjective moral code and I will live according to that. And nobody has the right to judge anybody else based on their moral actions. So JP reaches out his hand to shake and says, thank you very much for your time, walks towards the door, picks up the guy's stereo, and leaves. Now, this guy comes running after him. He says, hey, you can't do that. That's my stereo. So JP replies, well, maybe I didn't understand you. See, I thought a minute ago you said there's no objective moral norms that apply to everybody. You have your moral truth, I have my moral truth, and we shouldn't enforce our views on anybody. And I happen to think if you're an upperclassman who likes to work out and you need a stereo, you have the right to walk into a freshman's dorm unannounced, take their stereo, and leave. Now, certainly you're not going to force your moral views upon me. It's brilliant. Now, I don't want to throw up a bunch of philosophical terms here, but that guy's in what we call a bind. As soon as somebody says they don't believe in objective morality, you just need to hang out with them long enough to find them to contradict themselves. That's why C.S. Lewis says, people don't disagree about objective morality, they disagree about the facts. Scott Klusendorf teaches us to ask this question when it comes to this abortion debate. He says, imagine a 5-year-old walks up to you holding something behind their back. And that 5-year-old says, Mommy, can I kill this? What are you going to ask? What is it, right? Now, if it's a stink bug, you're going to say, yeah, sure, just don't do it on my carpet. They pull it out and it's a cat. You said, yes, what are you waiting for? Let me help. I'm going to have to apologize later for that one. If it's a bunny rabbit, you're going to say, well, hold on a second. Now, say that little kid says, hey, I saw this thing in a stroller out on the sidewalk, and I pulled it out and pulls out this little infant and says, can I kill it? You're going to say, well, hold on. What are you thinking? In fact, you need a therapist if you think at 5 years old that that's even an option. What's the principle? How we treat something depends on what it is. It depends on what it is. If the unborn is just a glob of tissue, then no justification is necessary. But if it's a member of the human race, then what justification is adequate? There is such a thing as truth. There is a moral right and wrong, and it's written on our hearts and we know it. So why are we talking about morality? Well, the fact that truth is knowable is important. And it's not because we're right as Christians. I'm certainly not, and you can ask my wife about that. And it's not because we want to prove everybody else wrong. No, it's because Jesus says that the truth shall set you free. We have a culture that has bought lies, that is enslaved by them, and it's destroying them. If you're motivated by anything, be motivated by a broken heart and the damage that lies cost. Right? Because each lie brings this world a little further into despair. But each truth, we bring a little heaven into it instead. See, we're already on the winning side. Jesus reigns. We're on the side of truth. Now, that shouldn't motivate us to arrogance, but it should motivate us to compassion, to have a broken heart, to suffer for those that believe the lies of the enemy. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to come and be here together. We thank you that you have created a moral standard. Lord, that is knowable. Lord, that you love us enough to invite us into your truth, to be in a relationship with you for eternity. Lord, I pray as these men and women prepare for their week coming up, that they can live in light of the knowledge both that they are your sons and daughters, but also that you have set a guideline, not because you are mean or vindictive, because you love us and you want the best for us. Lord, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen.